Yes. Good morning, Dhamma brothers and sisters. How are you feeling today? Very good, very good. Thank you. My name is Ratna, and it's a pleasure to be the service leader for today's session. I just came back from Vipassana retreat last weekend and feeling very happy and fully refreshed, physically, mentally, and spiritually. And I hope that all of you also feeling excited to welcome the new year. So I just wanted to wish everyone a very happy new year and wishing you and family fulfilling 2023 filled with Dhamma joy, contentment, and good health. So, and today we are very privileged to have Bhante Kovida with us. So before we invite him to lead the meditation and Dhamma sharing, let's do a morning puja. I'd like to invite you to just put your hands together to start the puja. Salutation to the Triple Gem. Let us pay respect to the Triple Gem. Arahang Sama Sambuddho Bhagava Buddhang Bhagavantang Abhivademi. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Dhammang Namasami. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho Sanghang Namami. Please put your palms together to partake in the offerings to the Buddha. The offerings of the 5 items allows us to express our gratitude to the Buddha and serves as a symbol to help us remember the teachings. Please join wholeheartedly and read the verses together. Offering of light. Light symbolizes wisdom. May the light of Dhamma dispel the darkness of ignorance. Offering of incense. Incense symbolizes the fragrance of pure moral conduct. This reminds us to cultivate good conduct. Offering of water. Water symbolizes purity, clarity, and calmness. It reminds us to practice the Buddha's teachings, to cleanse one's mind, which is full of desires, ill will, and delusions, to attain the state of purity. Offering of fruits. Fruits symbolize the ultimate fruit of enlightenment, which is our goal. They also remind us that all actions will have their effects. Offering of flowers. Flowers symbolize impermanence. The freshness, fragrance, and beauty of flowers are impermanent. This reminds us that we should all live in the present. Remembering thus, we should reduce our craving and attachment. Thank you, Sister Jenny. Let us pay homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. We chant the verses for taking the three refuge. Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dhammang saranang gacchami, Sanghang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Dutiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami, Tatiyampi Sanghang saranang gacchami. We chant these verses to observe the 5 precepts. Panatipata Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami, Adinna Dana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami, Kamesu Micchacara Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami, Musawada Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami, Surameraya Majapamadatthana Veramani Sikkhapadang Samadhiyami. Let us recollect the sublime qualities of the Buddha. Iti piso bhagava arahang sama sambuddho vijacharana sampano sugato lokavidu anuttaro purisa dhamma sarati Sata Dewa Manusanang Buddho Bhagavati. Let us recollect the sublime qualities of the Dhamma. Swakato Bhagavata Dhammo Sanditiko Akaliko Ehipasiko Opanaiko Pacatang Veditabo Vinyuhiti. Let us recollect the sublime qualities of the Sangha. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sawakasangho Uju Patipanno Bhagavato Sawakasangho Nyaya Patipanno Bhagavato Sawakasangho Samichi Patipanno Bhagavato Sawakasangho Yadidang Chattari Purisa Yugani Atha Purisa Pugala Esa Bhagavato Sawakasangho Ahuneyo Pahuneyo Dakhineyo Anjali Karaneyo Anuttarang Punya Ketang Lokasati. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, welcome everyone. And before we call Bhante, I'll just do a short introduction of Bhante Kovida. Bhante Kovida, who grew up in Jamaica and immigrated to Canada, studied science, then traveled overland from Europe to India and Nepal, where he studied Indian history and culture, yoga and Buddhism. After doing some social development work in Sri Lanka, he took ordination under Venerable Balangoda Ananda Maitreya, a noted teacher and meditation practitioner. Since then, Bhante Kovida has been traveling and sharing the Dhamma across Canada and several other countries. So he will lead us in a short meditation followed by the talk. Please put our hands together to welcome Bhante Kovida. Welcome, Bhante Kovida, to Buddhist Fellowship. I'd like to invite everyone to pay respect to Bhante Kovida. First bow. Second bow. And third bow. Thank you. Thank you.
So let us just do a few minutes of mindful breathing. That's coming to the present moment. Breathing in, I know I am breathing in. Breathing out, I know I am breathing out. Present moment, wonderful moment. Now let us do the loving kindness meditation, otherwise known as Metta Bhavana. May I be well, happy and peaceful. May I be well, happy and peaceful. May my family be well, happy and peaceful. May my friends be well, happy and peaceful. May my co-workers be well, happy and peaceful. May my teachers be well, happy and peaceful. May all beings be well, happy and peaceful. So, good morning, everyone. I would like to test your memories because I happen to have a very good memory. And no, it has nothing to do with past karma. I was just born that way. I was here 3 years ago, January 2020. And you may recall that's when the Wuhan virus outbreak became international news. And of course, at that time, no one could imagine that that event would become a global pandemic. The future is indeed uncertain. And while I was here 3 years ago, I gave a talk on understanding the nature of fear. I'm just curious, how many people had attended that talk? Understanding the nature of fear. Okay. Anyway, the talk is on YouTube. You can see it later on. Just search Bhante Kovida Buddhist Fellowship. You'll find the talk there. Because what I discovered, what I observed during the pandemic, because I was here at the very start of it, was apart from the corona COVID virus, the biggest virus was fear and paranoia. I'm sure you've noticed that yourself. You discovered that. And of course, the main source of that fear and paranoia was the news media. I saw that very clearly. And of course, from that, the politicians became very fearful, very paranoid. And of course, when you're paranoid, your behavior tends to be very irrational beyond reason. Because that's the nature of fear and paranoia. Now, just briefly, after I was in Singapore in January 2020, I returned to Malaysia to continue teaching in the KL area. And so I was able to continue teaching until the end of February. And I returned to Singapore very briefly for 4 days because I had to fly to Perth, Western Australia, to visit some Malaysian friends. Because my flight to Perth was booked from Singapore. And when I arrived in Perth was very relaxed at that time, very relaxed. They just asked me 4 questions at the airport, that's all. So I had a very pleasant visit. And during March, some infections began in Melbourne and Sydney area, but not in Perth. Perth was still very relaxed, and schools were still open. And of course, there were infections began in Melbourne, Sydney, because there were just many more international flights. Because Melbourne, Sydney, they have a lot of international flights, whereas Perth, only a few flights. And I had met an Australian contact in Perth who used to be at Ajahn Brahm's monastery. He was a lay practitioner, and he was no longer at the monastery. And he offered to take me to Ajahn Brahm's monastery. So I thought, good, finally I'm going to see, Ajahn Brahm's monastery. But then he began to watch a lot of news. Bad idea. He got scared, and he decided to stay home and isolate himself. Even though Perth area was still very low risk. No lockdown, and schools were still open. So by early April, I was booked to return to Singapore. Then I was going to continue teaching in KL during April, and my return flight to Canada was from KL. But by early April, friends in Singapore and KL said, Bhante, you can't come back now. You have to go directly from Perth to Canada, to Toronto. So some very kind friends in Singapore quickly collected some funds and arranged a one-way flight from Perth to Sydney, and then Air Canada from Sydney all the way up to Vancouver on the west coast, and then another 4.5 hours to Toronto. And I went to the Cambodian temple where I stay sometimes. It's close to Lake Ontario. And the guest house where I usually stay at, there was an elderly Cambodian monk there. And he had recently ordained. He was a family man. You know, he had children, grandchildren, and he thought he would, ordain for his remaining years in order to make merit for his future life. Many Buddhists in Southeast Asia have that belief. They're making merit for their future life. So when he heard I was coming, I was arriving, of course he panicked. Of course, he had no idea where I was coming from. He simply panicked, and he thought, I was going to come and infect him, and he was going to die. So the head monk says, never mind, I'll take you to a motel not too far away, and you can do the quarantine there. Because the government said you have to do the mandatory quarantine program. And the elderly monk, he became so scared, he locked himself in the in the guest house. And later, the head monk had to call his family because he knew the family. Called his daughter, son, to speak to their father to get him to calm down. So I went to this motel, and it was run by an East Indian family. And of course, they're all scared. And in that part of Canada, we call it Southern Ontario, Toronto, Lake Ontario, and so on. Because the province of Ontario is very, very large, and it goes all the way up north. And in the South Ontario area, there was even more fear and paranoia compared to Perth, because Perth was still so relaxed when I left. Because in that part of Canada, not only are they getting the Canadian news media, but also the American news media. And you know how powerful the American news media is. Because across the lake we have Buffalo, New York. And we get all their news media, both radio, television. So that's why you have extra paranoia in that area. So at the motel, when I informed the people who were running the motel, these East Indians, that I was there to do the 14-day quarantine, of course, they panicked. Because they assumed I had the virus. So they just wanted me to stay in the room, and they didn't want to see me. So I could observe all this fear and paranoia. But I was still fairly calm. And then I thought, how am I going to get food here? Because the motel people, they don't want to see me. And the easiest way of getting food at that motel was to phone a pizza place, and they would have pizza delivery, because that's very popular in North America. And I thought, I can manage 2 or 3 days on pizza, but 14 days? And then suddenly I remembered something which is very helpful. Because some years before that, before I took ordination in Sri Lanka, I became very sick. I ate too much rich food, and I was very run down at that time. So I did a 5-day fast, just drinking water. And it was such a good experience that I've always wanted to do a longer fast, like a 10-day fast. But the opportunity never came until some years later at this motel and during the quarantine and having food problems. And I thought, wow, finally I can do the 10-day fast, finally. So the opportunity came and I was able to do the 10-day fast. Again, a very good experience. And if you've ever done any long fasting or more than 2 days, you know, after 2 days, the hunger goes away. Of course, the first 2 days, you tend to feel very weak, very dizzy. You have to rest. And all you think about is food, including all the menus you have read. But fortunately, after 2 days, when the hunger goes away, it's very, 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 very calming, very relaxing. And of course, because I was so jet-lagged, flying all the way from Perth, you know, I was sleeping most of the time, so it was very easy. And even after 10 days, I could have gone for maybe another 5 days, but after 10 days, I thought 10 days was enough. So I'm looking forward to another 10-day fast when the opportunity arises. Now, as you know, normally the future is uncertain. And from your experience, you know, if you think too much about the future, we naturally experience, you know, anxiety and fear. But if we practice mindfulness, then our minds can be more calm, more stable, so we can deal more skillfully with the uncertainty of the future. And that includes when we go into the past and having regrets, and sometimes feeling guilty about mistakes you have made. And as you know, when we remember unpleasant memories, they can be very challenging. Because as you know, unpleasant memories can seem very solid, very permanent, especially when emotions are involved. Because you know, you can remember something that happened a long time ago and you can still feel upset, right? You can still feel upset. Of course, you can still have regrets, you still feel guilty, and so on. So that's the nature of the mind. But with mindfulness, we're able to deal with unpleasant memories. And one of the benefits of mindfulness, we begin to see that these unpleasant memories, although they can still bring up, you know, emotions and so on, you begin to see that really they don't have a solid, permanent reality, although sometimes they seem that way because of these emotions. But rather we begin to see the actual experience of it, that they're just thoughts and images that are happening now in the present moment. Although those thoughts and images are related to past experiences, but the actual experience of these unpleasant memories are really just thoughts and images that are happening now in the present moment. Only thinking. And it's very liberating when we realize that. Likewise, when we're projecting in the future, we can realize that really they're just thoughts and images that are just happening now. Now, why the pandemic was more challenging is because it added more uncertainty to the normal uncertainty of the future. As you know, there was the uncertainty of what type of virus it was, or how dangerous it was, or if you got infected, would you be able to recover, to survive? Plus, there was the added uncertainty of how long will this thing last? You may recall. So this is where the practice of present moment awareness, mindfulness, was most beneficial. And as you know, normally we think that we're in control of our lives. And you know, we're living here in a very modern, developed society where we have a lot of conveniences. And there's a lot of things we take for granted. And suddenly, with this pandemic and lockdown restrictions, suddenly we were no longer in control. So initially, I must congratulate all of you that you're able to experience, or that you had the opportunity to practice a very challenging but worthwhile practice of patient endurance and acceptance. You had no choice but to practice this. In a way, I think it was a good opportunity to practice this. Patient endurance and acceptance. Because as you know, Singaporeans are not well known for being patient, right? Because when you're anxious, you're very impatient. And unfortunately, the smartphone technology, although it's very fast, it's very convenient, but it's making people more anxious and more impatient. And patience is indeed a virtue. It really is. Now, before I arrived in Malaysia in last September, I had to spend 10 months in Sri Lanka. And I had to practice patient endurance and acceptance. But it had nothing to do with the pandemic. Because when I arrived there, I was invited there by a friend. I realized it was not such a good idea after all. But I had made the commitment to stay. And my friend had arranged a visa extension. So I felt I had to stay. So the challenges I was facing was really regarding the climate and the limited food choices. So I had to eat Sri Lankan rice and curry every day for 10 months, and sometimes twice a day. Now, people in Singapore and Malaysia will never have that that problem. unless you go to Sri Lanka. But it's something I had to accept. I had to endure patiently. And I think many people here saw some of the bad news, what was happening in Sri Lanka. And again, this is where the media is very misleading. Because if you just watch the news media of what was happening in Sri Lanka, you get the impression that the entire island is falling apart, right? But that's just the nature of the news media. This is why I rarely watch the news media. But where I was in the south was very different. It was very calm, very relaxed. Yes, we had power cuts, and there were, lineups for fuel shortages. But apart from that, it was not as, desperate as the media had portrayed the entire country to be. And instead of watching the media, what I did was I would just watch nature, especially the monkeys. Watching monkeys taught me a lot. Because the monkeys didn't care about what was happening, with all the human drama. They didn't care about, the economic problems. They didn't care about the corrupt politicians, right? They were just being monkeys. And they were in the present moment. And most people in the rural areas, away from the capital, they survive very well because, they cultivated food. They managed very well. And despite all the problems, challenges that people were having, the people were still bringing, dana to the temples, both breakfast dana, lunch dana. So I really admired their kindness and their devotion. And I think during the pandemic, we had the opportunity to reflect on the 3 facts of existence, namely impermanence, constant change, unsatisfactoriness, uncertainty, and the absence of a permanent separate self. So when we had the opportunity to practice, it was always a good subject to reflect on. And also you find that with acceptance, with patient endurance and acceptance, we had the opportunity to practice the recollection of gratitude, Because when we can practice gratitude, it brings us into the present moment, and it also uplifts the mind. It makes the mind more positive, instead of just being caught in that reactive mode of negativity, of complaining, of disliking things, not wanting things to be the way they are. So the practice of gratitude is a very beneficial practice when we are facing, these difficulties and challenges. This is why I like to remind people who are, say, stuck in traffic, especially in KL. Well, here it's not too bad, but say in KL, I remind them that it's an opportunity, if you're getting upset and impatient in the traffic jam, to breathe mindfully and just be thankful that you have a car. And also be thankful that you have, fuel. Because in Sri Lanka, people had to line up sometimes the whole day just to get 5 liters of fuel. And in KL, I like to remind people there that the traffic jams and congestion in Jakarta is much, much worse because I've experienced it. But what I admired about the people in Jakarta was how patient they were, very patient. Of course, they're more relaxed, yeah? They're more calm. Because they realize, their common sense, they realize that if you're not patient, you go mad. So you have a choice. Very patient. And just go with the flow, as they say. Just go at the flow. I really admired that. Because as you know, there's just endless, countless vehicles, and those who can't afford, cars and other vehicles, thousands of, motorbikes, scooters, and so on. And you find that when we practice gratitude, and we're more in the present moment, we can be thankful for many, many things that we just take for granted. Even water, just to have drinking water, or just water, period. And we have fairly, clean air, or we have power. Because in Sri Lanka, sometimes the power cuts are like 4, 5, 6 hours. 1 hour is not too bad, 1, 2 hours, but 4, 5, 6 hours, a bit long. So I had to start using the hand fan again. And may I remind you that in Malaysia, Singapore, before you had electricity, people used hand fans. But now, of course, you have so much power, or reliable power. Of course, you have aircon and so on. We don't think of hand fans anymore. Yeah, so the practice of gratitude is very beneficial. And of course, be thankful for health, for good health, or relatively good health. Be thankful that we have we can get medical assistance. Because as you know, many places do not have medical assistance. Even in the United States, such an affluent country, many people do not have access to medical attention. They just can't afford it. And if you can't afford medical assistance, there's no medical assistance. It's like that. I noticed also, first I'll do a reading, because sometimes I do postings on Facebook. And this was the first posting I made while I was in Perth, before I had to leave Australia. During epidemics and pandemics, which have been affecting human civilization for many centuries, people will get infected and some people will die due to certain conditions. This is just the way things are. Seeing the world from a larger perspective of the planets and solar system, one can realize that birth, existence, and death are only parts of a process in a much vaster and timeless reality. Seeing the world from a larger perspective of the planets and solar system, one can realize that birth, existence, and death are only parts of a process in a much vaster and timeless reality. Just as countless waves arise and fall incessantly on the surface of the ocean, while the ocean itself is beyond birth and death. We might be better prepared than before, but our modern medical science and facilities have their limitations when numbers get overwhelming. We can only try to do our best and be humble and learn to accept the fact of death, which is inseparable from life, which no one can escape from. Death is 100% certain. There is sickness, aging, and death because there is birth. If there was no birth, there would be no sickness, aging, and death. An invisible virus is causing disruption and havoc around the world. And the politicians and news media hype are making the situation worse by creating more fear, anxiety, panic and paranoia, and frustration. This is a good opportunity to practice mindfulness, present moment awareness, and reflect on the three facts of existence: constant change and impermanence, unsatisfactoriness and uncertainty, and no permanent separate self or ego, entity, or personality. There is only mind-body process, only earth, water, heat, air, and space. And while we're alive, there's also the element of consciousness related to the six senses: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, imagining. And at a deeper level of reflection, there are atoms, otherwise known as cosmic energy, because everything is composed of atoms. Now, during the Buddha's time, they were not aware of atoms and molecules, but now we are aware of these. And you may recall the first law of science. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only change its form, and it can move from one place to another. So at this deeper level of reflection, contemplation, one is able to go beyond the idea of birth and death and find true inner peace and compassion. Compassion becomes real and meaningful when we recognize our shared humanity, our shared hardships and challenges. It is compassion that can give us an inner strength and peace to accept that which is beyond our control. What we can control, however, is how we handle and respond to the current global situation. Mindfulness helps us to have a more stable and calm base of presence and attention, so that we can be more calm and patient, kind, humble, and thankful during these times of uncertainty, frustration, confusion, and anxiety. We can learn to be at peace with ourselves, coming to terms with our basic aloneness, being simple and content with what we have, not seeking temporary pleasure and happiness in shopping for new things, appreciating family and friends, helping others when we can, and appreciating nature, the natural environment in the present moment. Present moment, wonderful moment. Breathing in, I smile. Breathing out, I smile. Peace, calm. There is gratitude for just being alive. Life is indeed a great mystery. Now, initially, when I returned to the temple and I had done the quarantine, I discovered that everyone was on Zoom, except me. I didn't know the technology at the time, and I was not in a mood to have talks and discussions and so on, because I was still in a retreat mode, that quiet mode. Because the 14-day quarantine for me was like a retreat, very quiet, and then doing the 10-day fasting. And when you fast for a long period, you become very aware of the sensations in the stomach area, very, very sensitive. So this is why I was not in that mode to be having discussions and so on Zoom. But I could understand why a lot of people were on Zoom, not only for work, but also for for spiritual support and so on. Because most people were just not used to being alone, being in isolation. So most of my Dhamma sharing was on Facebook. And before I knew it, I had literally hundreds of Facebook requests, mainly from India, Bangladesh, and from Sri Lanka. Because now, of course, millions of people, especially the younger generation, millions of people are on Facebook. India, Bangladesh, and these places. And most of them had WhatsApp. And they kept asking me, Bhante, please send your WhatsApp number. And I said, sorry, no WhatsApp. I'm a dinosaur. But if you have questions, here's my email address. Yes, I'm still using email. But I know a lot of you WhatsApp people don't use email anymore, right? It's slow, right? It's slow, it's too slow, right? Anyway, once I got a Facebook message from a young man in France, I guess it's Paris. Like millions of people around the world, he was experiencing, anxiety, frustration, confusion, fear, and so on. So I guess he found some video on Facebook explaining about mindful breathing and so on. So he tried mindful breathing, but his mind was so agitated. He just couldn't do mindful breathing, so he asked me, could I suggest a simple practice? I said, actually, there's a very simple practice. Just go to YouTube, there's a video, and it's called dynamic meditation. I think some of you know it, where you move your hands. I learned it in Thailand many years ago. So if you have a problem with the monkey mind, you can do this practice. It's a very easy way to focus and calm the mind. And at the same time, you can let go of a lot of unnecessary thinking. So I recommended this video to him, and I said, you can play some calming music in the background. And he really practiced because he could do nothing else. And after several days, he sent me a message, and he said, thank you so much, because with this practice, I'm able to experience a very deep calmness that I did not think was possible. Because, when you're very anxious, very agitated, you can't imagine the mind being really calm. So he was able to experience very deep calmness. And with the deep calmness, all the frustration, anxiety, confusion, fear just went away. And especially people in Singapore, it's not Singapore, in Malaysia, as you know, the lockdown, when they finally had the lockdown, they went to extremes. Yeah? It was very, very strict. And you're not allowed to go out, even walking, exercising, and so on. The police was always checking on people. So I would recommend that people follow the videos, like especially the Qigong video, because they're very simple movements, and they could really release all that, stress, emotional stress, frustration, and so on. And for those people who didn't want to do Qigong, I just recommended that they, put on some dancing music and just dance. Because that's a form of Qigong too. And in case you're wondering, I grew up in a dancing culture in the West Indies. It's very different from this culture. And I also noticed, especially in the Western societies, they have a very immature and very ignorant view on death. Many people in Western societies, including Australian society, they see death as something very unnatural. Like it's not supposed to happen until maybe once you pass 90 years old. And I noticed, if somebody happens to be famous and they die, say even in their 80s, they will often say this person is untimely death. Untimely, even somebody in their 80s, it's untimely simply because they happen to be, famous. Celebrity, movie star, and so on. And I noticed in the UK, on the media, BBC, radio, all the other shows, whenever they mentioned death, how many people have been infected today and how many people have died today, they always use the word sadly. Sadly, X number of people have died today. Or tragically, X number of people have died. So they're always promoting the idea that death, it should be sad, it should be tragic. And in the United States, they like to use the word unfair. Death is unfair. But it shows you that these Western societies, they have a very immature and very ignorant view on death. Because as we say, death happens. Simply because there is birth. It's very natural. And as you know, really, death is only sad or tragic only for the people who are left behind. Maybe you've heard that saying. But for the person who have died, there is no problem. As we say in my country, when you're dead, you're dead. Meaning there's no consciousness, no experience, no suffering, no problem. But of course, it's the people who are left behind, families, close friends, there is sadness and so on, because of our emotional attachments. So this is where the Dhamma can help us to understand death more more clearly, and so we can accept death more easily. And I think part of the stress that the Western societies had during the pandemic is because they see death as something, awful, tragic, whatever. It's not supposed to happen, but it is happening. So of course, they're trying to save everybody as much people as possible, but they can only save so much. As we said, they're limited. And I'm not sure how many people have watched the documentary on the previous global pandemic. How many of you have watched it? The Spanish flu pandemic. I recommend that you watch it because it's on YouTube. It was in 1918 to 1921. And you can imagine the conditions at that time were very, very different from today. And the Spanish flu pandemic started towards the end of the First World War. And the virus was initially spread by soldiers, because there are a lot of soldiers going back and forth on the ships. Because in those days you didn't have all those international flights that we have today. And even those young, able-bodied soldiers were susceptible to that virus. And they can only estimate how many people died. They're not sure. But the numbers are much, much more than the numbers we have today. One estimation is between 30 and 50 million people. And that's just an estimation. But I recommend that you watch that pandemic. You watch that documentary. Because now we know what a pandemic is like. We've experienced it. And as you may know, Bill Gates, the famous Bill Gates, gave a talk on TED Talk on YouTube. You can still find it if you haven't watched it. He gave a TED Talk in 2015, and he was predicting another pandemic. And of course, nobody wanted to believe that it would happen. But now we know it happens. Pandemic happens. They're rare, but they do happen. And it will happen again in the future. It could be 50 years, 60, 70, 80, 90, it could be 100 years. But it will happen. And we mentioned before that the reason why our experiences are impermanent and always changing is simply because we're a process. We're a process of body and mind. And in the Pali language, it's called rupa and nama. For example, in some Theravada countries, a Buddha statue is often referred to as a Buddha Rupa. Buddha Rupa, which means a physical representation of the Buddha. It's just a physical representation, a symbol. And when the Buddha said, see the world as something which is permanent and constantly changing, see the world as something unsatisfactory and uncertain because it's always changing, and see the world as something which is devoid of a permanent separate self. He was not speaking to the external empirical world. He was pointing to this world here. The reality of body and mind, this process, which contains the six senses, the consciousness of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking, imagining. Of course, when we are more mindful, we begin to see this truth. But if we are not mindful, we always think that I am here and the world is there. It's outside of ourselves. Yes, there is a physical world outside of ourselves, but our experience of the physical world is in the mind. It's in the mind. Now, for example, just look at the Buddha statue, okay? Just look at it. Now close your eyes. Close your eyes for a moment. Okay, there is no Buddha statue. But there's hearing consciousness, and you can feel your body sitting. Now you open your eyes, and suddenly you're aware of the Buddha statue. So in other words, your experience of the Buddha statue is in the mind. Namely, seeing consciousness. Through seeing, you're aware of the Buddha statue. So this was the reality that the Buddha was pointing to. The world of body-mind process and the six consciousness. And consciousness is constantly changing. Because many people believe that consciousness is something permanent. And therefore, after death, the seemingly permanent state of consciousness will continue after death. It will take rebirth after death. But that is not correct. You know, when you investigate, you see that consciousness is constantly changing. So there's no permanent consciousness that continues after death. For example, in Sri Lanka, some people believe that after death, this permanent state of consciousness will go up to the Deva realm, which is just a concept, a belief. And then later, this permanent consciousness will return to the human world and take rebirth into a new body. These are just beliefs. This is why investigation is very important. And to investigate properly, the mind has to be calm. The mind has to be calm. Now, when we use mindfulness, we're in the present moment. We can see the truth of physical and mental process. For example, the physical sensation of the breath. Just feel the body breathing. That is the physical process. or the body, and the awareness of the breathing sensation is mind, the mental process. Physical sensation of the breath is the body or rupa, and the awareness of the physical sensation is the mind. Nama. See, there's just nama and rupa. And if you happen to be doing the dynamic meditation, maybe initially you can see it more easily when you move, like say mindful walking. The feet moving and touching, that is the body, the physical process, and the awareness of the feet moving and touching is the mind. There's only rupa and nama. No permanent I or me. Only body and mind. And we're alive because we're a process. If we were not a process, we would not be alive. But what is interesting, it's very easy to overlook this fact, that we're a process. Simply because we are social creatures, and we use language, and we use labels to communicate. You know, I, you, he, she, and we use names. But names are just social labels. But they're not who we really are. So because we use language, we use labels to communicate, we tend to see each other as personalities, as selves, as egos. And some egos are not so big as some egos. But it's because of that we tend to overlook this fact of that we're a body-mind process. But only when we come back to mindfulness, we see this fact. Only body and mind. It's a very profound, but at the same time, it's a very direct teaching. Even when washing the dishes, you can see body and mind. Physical and mental process, phenomena. And of course, because we're a process, we have to keep recharging this process, right? The same way that you have to recharge your mobile phones. So we are actually rechargeable batteries, you can say. The biological batteries. You keep recharging it. Because very often somebody will ask me, all this energy that we have, you know, when we die, where does all this energy go to? I said, where do you think this energy comes from? Right? There's all this recharging we have to do, you know, eating, drinking, and of course, we have to keep breathing, right? The process has to keep breathing. Of course, exercising, you know, to keep the process healthy, and so on. Only rupa and nama, or nama and rupa. And then we go a bit deeper. You have the 5 aggregates, or the 5 factors of daily experience. I don't have time to go into this, but the video is there. And then you go a bit deeper, and you have the 32 parts of the body. And you go a bit deeper, and you have the 6 elements. Earth, water, heat, air, space, and consciousness. So the video is also there. And then you go a bit deeper than the elements, and you have atoms, otherwise known as cosmic energy. And what is interesting is that the atoms that are in our bodies at this moment, they have been recycled many, many, many times. That's right. So there are some atoms in our bodies right now that were once in the bodies of dinosaurs that existed, millions of years ago. Very interesting. And because we're 70% water, a lot of our atoms were in the sky. Even recently, we're actually in the sky as water vapor, clouds, and rain. And in cold countries, as snow. Very interesting. So the title for the video on the elements, it's titled 5 Elements Reflection, Bhante Kovida. 5 Elements Reflection, Bhante Kovida. Yeah, I think it was recorded at BGF in PJ, BGF. Okay. And what is interesting about these elements, when we reflect on it on a regular basis, you get to a stage where you realize that we're just a collection of elements pretending to be people. That's right. Collection of elements pretending to be people. And this collection of elements that is sitting here speaking is pretending to be Bhante Kovida from Canada. And your collection of elements is pretending to be who you are, or who you think you are. Because in the end, it's all pretending. Quite interesting. And if you really want to know what continues after death, which is the million-dollar question, it's the elements. They go back to nature. There's nothing in the personality, the I, which continues. The elements go back to nature. And then they are recycled atoms. Okay, at this point, are there any questions? Any questions? Yes.
My name is 𝐊𝐕𝐝, and thank you so much for your sharing. It's been very enlightening and elucidating. I just have one question. If we are made up of these 5 elements that come from the universe, the cosmos, then what powers consciousness?
Okay. Not only is consciousness the 6th element, one of the 6 elements, first, consciousness is considered the 6th element because It is because of consciousness we're aware of life and our daily experience via the six senses, right? Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, thinking, and also with consciousness we're also aware of the other 5 elements. Earth, water, heat, air, and space. So this is why consciousness is considered an element. Now, consciousness is also a part of the 5 skandhas, right? The 5 factors of experience. Okay? And these 5 factors are a part of the body-mind process that we just mentioned. Yeah, later you can watch the video where I have to clarify the nature of perception and consciousness. But the point is they work together. These 5 factors, they work together. They're interdependent and interconnected. And this is why I like to give a simple example of these 5 things working, because initially, when we hear about these 5 factors, they seem a bit complicated. And we don't see how they are related to our daily experience. So this is why when people say that consciousness continues after death, it cannot be correct, because for one thing, consciousness is not permanent. Right? It's always changing. And also, you cannot separate consciousness from the other 4 factors. Because they work together. They're interdependent, interconnected. This is very important to understand. It's like trying to separate your nose from your face. You can't do that. Right? Your nose is a part of your face. Just like your eyebrows, nose, chin, mouth, whatever. So the question is, why do we do that? Why do we say that consciousness continues after death? It's mainly because of wishful thinking. Wishful thinking. Because we're trapped in thinking, and thinking wants to continue after death. Thinking is afraid to come to an end, right? This mind stream is afraid to come to an end. And that's why there's the fear of death and the unknown. It's afraid to come to an end. But in the silence of meditation, when you allow all this mental activity to become silent, then we experience the unknown. In the silence of meditation, we experience the unknown, meaning the absence of thinking. Because thinking is always based on that which we know. Yeah, when you watch the video, you can reflect on it, because this is very profound. Because thinking is always based on 3 things in the mind: memory, past experience, knowledge, information. Memory, past experience, knowledge, information. If you reflect on it, you see this. It's very obvious. But the only problem, we're not taught this in school. But they should be teaching this in school. So really, it's very simple, isn't it? It's not rocket science, as we say. It's not rocket science. They should be teaching this in school. At least high school, right? But we're not taught this, only subjects. Yeah, you begin to see that. And thinking projects itself in the future, right? You see that. All our minds do this. projecting, either remembering or you're projecting in the future. So thinking is a movement in time. From past to future, past to future. And it doesn't matter what language you're thinking in. Mandarin, Hokkien, Japanese, Spanish, whatever, Russian, it's the same thought process. Right? Past to future, past to future. Anyway, watch the video a few times. It becomes very clear. Is consciousness. What is the power of it? It is a part of the process that we are. We are this body-mind process, but it's something you have to experience, not just as an idea. You have to experience it through mindfulness, reflection. And as we said, we have to keep recharging the process. And in that body-mind process, you have the 5 factors. You have the body, the physical form with all its sense organs. You have no, don't try to write all this thing down. I suggest you watch the video. And you can always watch it many, many times. Consciousness, as the Buddha realized, is always related to the 6 senses. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, thinking, and imagining. Right? So thinking is part of consciousness. And reflection is a part of thinking. But reflective thinking is different from our normal, everyday thinking. Right? Because normal, everyday thinking tends to be very agitated, restless. It tends to be reactive, right? Reactive, you see that. It tends to be shallow, superficial, blah, 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 blah. And it tends to be self-centered, right? I. Whereas reflective, contemplative thinking is calm. It's coming from a calm state. And it's not reactive. It is more objective because you're exploring, right? You're investigating. So it's not self-centered. You're exploring. And of course, you go deep. You're able to go deep. Your understanding goes deep. Not, superficial, blah, 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 blah. This is why to really understand the Dhamma is very important that we calm the mind first. Then when you read the Dhamma with that calm state and do reflection or understanding, can go deeper. Because when the mind is restless, agitated, you can't go very deep, right? Yeah. They're just words. They're just words. Okay? Yeah. So see the video. Watch the videos. Yeah. Yes. Any
Anyone
other questions?
else?
Any?
Oh, yes.
Hi. Thank you, Bhante, for sharing with us your insights and knowledge. I am Bing Chen, a friend of Evelyn. I brought her here today for the first time. Time to time I'll come here, but I've been here, I think, this is a long time since I've been here. Anyway, I'm just sharing my own thoughts, which is related to what Evelyn is asking. So maybe I'll paraphrase what she's asking. So she's asking, what drives this consciousness? So am I correct to say on the most basic level, it's energy, is what drives the consciousness is just energy? And am I right to say that?
you must remember the body-mind process is there, and the energy comes from our constant recharging, right? Just remember your cell phone, you got to keep recharging it. So likewise, this process has to be constantly recharged, right? It's like that. So how they work very quickly, say if you're walking very quickly, say in a bush or botanical gardens, right? Your body is there with all your sense organs, and you hear something, okay? You see an object, you hear something, you look, you see an object. With perception, we recognize that object as, say, a frog or a snake. From that recognition comes feeling or sensation. If you happen to like frogs or snakes, you're happy to see the frog or the snake, right? It's a pleasant experience. If you don't like frogs or snakes, you know, ooh, aversion, fear, anxiety. You see? This is how these things work. From that feeling sensation comes your mental reaction or mental formation. If it's a pleasant experience, you might say, wow, I'll just stop and watch, you know, the frog hopping or the snake, you know, slithering. Or you might want to play with them, but you don't want to touch them, you know. So maybe you might take a twig or something. You just gently play with the frog or the snake because there's no aversion, no fear, right? On the other hand, if it's very unpleasant, there's aversion, fear, you might quickly walk away or run. If you're really scared, you run. So that's an example of these 5 things working, and they work together. Okay? So these 5 things work together. That's right. And they're interdependent, interconnected. It's like that. Very interesting, yeah.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, just on you mentioned that after death, sorry, after death there's no like. What I want to ask is a continuity about the teaching about the karma and the rebirth. You know, after we die, right? There is no like okay, all the 5 elements. I mean, all the 5 skandha is. No longer there, but there it will be a continuity.
Everything shuts down.
Yeah, but then there will be a continuity, right?
No.
There will be a continuity in the sense that
no, you want something to continue.
I know, but I know. But what I'm saying is, I want to understand from the Dharma teaching. But when Buddha talked about rebirth, what does it mean? And why is a particular samuppada?
Right.
Does it actually relate to afterbirth as well? You know, or the scope is just this life?
Okay, tell you what, my understanding is different from what you read. Also, you must understand that what you read, even in the sutta, you have to question it. Remember, Kalama Sutta. I always have to remind people, during the Buddha's time, there was not a video. He didn't have a video camera pointing at him. And he didn't have a Sony recording machine. I just use the word Sony because it's a popular brand. You understand? So always question what you read. Okay? Also, you must understand that I grew up as a Christian where people are always quoting the Bible to me. You know, this is God's word. We have to follow this. So when people are quoting sutta to me, it sounds the same. Because in the end, it's your personal experience, your own practice, your own investigation, that is important, not reading. Now, my understanding of rebirth is very different. Because let's be honest, only when we die we know for sure, right? So arguing about this is a waste of time. But while I'm alive, what the rebirth I can see for sure is in the mind. Mental rebirth, meaning the arising of the I, the self, related to craving, aversion, and delusion. You understand? Relating to our mental defilements. So in other words, the aim in practice is to lessen this mental rebirth. So there's less dukkha, suffering, conflict, confusion, and more peace. Just reflect on it. Just reflect on it. And also, you must remember, in this life, we have been through many lives. We have been through many lives. See? Yes. Put it this way. When you go home, maybe you have to ask your mother for all your photos from childhood, even baby photos, until your most recent photo. You line them up. From early childhood until now. You look at your photos. Do you ever look the same? Of course not. Again, we come back to the reality of body and mind, the process. We are this process, constantly changing. You can say that each day is a life. From the moment we wake up until we go to sleep at night, that's a life. Now, if you want to be more profound, you can say each moment is a life. Well, we don't have to get that profound. Just on a daily basis, we've been through many lives. And get your electronic calculator. Your age, how many years you've lived, how many months, how many days. You'll be surprised, thousands. So yesterday was a past life. You understand? Last week is a past life. Last month is a past life. And tomorrow, when we wake up, it's another life. It's a future life. What happens after death, we just have to wait and see. Wait and see. Okay? All right. Any other questions?
Thank you, Bhante, for your sharing and very interesting talk. I'd like to follow up on. Is it working? Yeah, I'd like to follow up on the question of our last brother who just questioned about karma, which is related to what you're sharing. You're sharing that when we die, our rupa and our mind will just sort of, I use simplistic terms.
It shuts down.
Shuts down.
The process simply shuts down.
And it's like our whole body will disintegrate. So, but then.
But what about the karma? Right?
Correct. Yeah.
I know.
But karma is supposed to be permanent. It follows you. If I use the layman term,
I know.
It's like it's recorded debit and credit. So how is this etched into the life that we have led in this world?
Yes.
Could you share with us?
Yes. Believe me, I first came to Malaysia, Singapore in 94, 95. And I've been hearing this constantly. So I'm used to this, and sometimes I don't want to talk about it because I get very bored with it. But I'll try and make it very simple. Many people here, Malaysia, Singapore, they see karma like a bank account, right? There's one account for good karma, there's one account for bad karma, okay? To me, my understanding of karma is very different. And it's very simple. It's simply cause and effect in your daily life. That's all. Cause and effect. Let me put it as simple as possible. If you choose to do wholesome actions, right? And you have wholesome thoughts, you're going to be a fairly happy person. On the other hand, if you choose to do unwholesome actions and you have unwholesome thoughts, you're not going to be a fairly happy, peaceful person. Is that simple enough? It's about what you do. It's what you do in your daily life.
Yeah, but I've seen, people who have been very good in this lifetime, but they have suffered a lot. And on the other hand, people who have done evil things, but they seem to have a very easy and comfortable life this lifetime.
Yes.
So, then we for Buddhists, we know that there's karma, there's past life
Yes.
that we have to account for. So I think the debit and credit in the bank account somehow is still there.
One of the things we have to reflect on is it's called cause and conditions. Cause and conditions. Just reflect on it. Cause on things happen because of a certain cause and certain conditions. Cause and conditions. But I know because normally we don't really investigate, and many things we don't understand. So humans like to try and find an easy answer to explain things that they cannot understand or they have no control over. So we say, oh, it must be past karma from a past life. And if you're a Christian, it's God's will. Very easy, isn't it? If you're a Muslim, inshallah, you know, the will of Allah. It's a very easy explanation. But if you really investigate, but of course you need time. You need time, you need the intention, the right effort. Then you begin to see the truth of cause and conditions. Now, for example, you remember the Indian Ocean tsunami? You remember that? 2004, I think, Boxing Day, December. I remember that date. What did the Christians say? God was punishing the sinners, right? The Muslims said Allah was punishing, you know, the non-believers. And what did the rest of Asia say? Past karma, you know. They've done something bad in their past lives and they're being punished by the tsunami. All this is wrong understanding because karma has nothing to do with the forces of nature. That is the point. Karma is simply what we do or what we choose to do and the results of that action. Cause and effect. But reflect on it, because I understand when you have these beliefs and you cling to those beliefs, it's very hard, very challenging to let go of those beliefs. And this is why I always say, you can believe anything you want to believe, really. You have that freedom. But remember one thing, the most important thing, as what the Buddha taught, present moment awareness, mindfulness. That is the important thing. Believe anything else. But the most important thing, present moment awareness, mindfulness. Because only with present moment awareness that we can deal with dukkha. Dukkha. And free the mind of dukkha. And this is why the Buddha, during all his many, many discussions with people, he always said, I only teach one thing. What is that? The truth of dukkha and the ending of dukkha. Okay? The truth of dukkha and the ending of dukkha. So always come back to that main teaching, mindfulness, awareness, which is part, of course, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path. Always come back to this, the truth of dukkha, the ending of dukkha. Because sometimes when I explain my understanding, you know what happened? Other people get confused or they get very upset. And when they get upset, I said, well, that's the truth of suffering, isn't it? And you're upset because you're clinging, you know, to your belief, you know, about past karma, rebirth. And what I'm saying is something different. That is the second noble truth, right? Clinging, clinging, attachment. So just reflect on it. Just reflect on it. Yes. Okay.
I think conscious of time. Are you okay with one more question?
Okay. I'm open for questions after lunch. You can come and see me after lunch. Okay? Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Bhante Kovida, for a very profound insights. Can we all say 3 sadhu? Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May I invite everyone to pay respect to Bhante Kovida. First bow. Second bow. Third bow. Thank you so much, Bhante. Thank you. May we invite you for the lunch?
Now?